Today's episode was sponsored by Lauren over on Patreon. So thank you so much, Lauren, and let's go ahead and get this patch up on the wall, shall we? Because her initials are L-E-T. I don't know. So yeah, there it is. It's very messily hung, and I'm not entirely sure if you can see it, but it is there right now. Full disclosure, it won't be there for the majority of the video because I didn't get my together in time to make it so that that was the case. But believe me when I say that, Lauren, you're part of the tapestry now and forever. When I asked Lauren if she had any special message she wanted me to say while I was thanking her, she said that she demands that everyone watching this like and subscribe. So, like, I don't know, I feel like she paid good money for me to say that, so you should probably listen to her. But yeah, thank you so much, Lauren. I really do appreciate you, and with that, let's start the episode. Hello, nitwits, and welcome to yet another episode of Knitting Time with Willie. I'm your host, Willie Muse, joined as always by my co-host, Nitcolis. And if you've been following my community page closely, which I sincerely hope none of you are, then you know that I received a copyright claim on my recent video about the movie The Black Dahlia. And I'm not gonna lie, it really sucked. This is the second time this has happened to me, and while I ended up beating the claims both times, the experience was incredibly unpleasant to say the least. I spend a lot of time and effort on my videos, and they usually take me about 3 weeks of my life to make, so to get to the end of that 3 weeks only to be told out of nowhere, like, hey, there's a chance nobody will see this and you won't make any money off of it, so all of that time and effort you put into it was a waste well, it's not fun. I do my absolute best to make sure that everything I'm doing is protected by fair use, but like, things happen. Most of this stuff is automated on some level, so even if I do everything to the letter, there's still a chance that a video I worked really hard on might still get taken down. Of course, that's a very big if. Fair use is incredibly complicated, and I'm not what you'd call a legal expert or literate, so truth told, I don't know every little detail of how the law works. I swear to any YouTube official who may be watching this that I genuinely try to be conscious of the clips that I use, because I never want to steal anyone's intellectual property. But that said, it might very well be the case that I still end up doing it accidentally, because I truly will never be able to fit all of the rules inside of my tiny little brain. I love sharing and discussing and reacting to clips of media, but the potential stress that looms over my head whenever I do it just doesn't feel worth it sometimes. And don't worry, I'm not going to stop using clips in my videos because, well, let's be honest, I need something to break up the sound of my voice. That said, though, I do want to try and lessen the amount of anxiety in my life wherever possible, and with that in mind, I'd like to welcome you all to my newest series, the Public Domain Happy Hour. This is where ragtime music would go, but I didn't feel like licensing it, la la. Basically, I've found a list of movies that are all in the public domain, and that means that I can use all of the clips from those movies that I goddamn well please. I have decided that whenever I don't feel like dealing with a lot of stress and legal minutia that I don't understand, I'm just going to pick one of these movies sight unseen and talk about it however I want, feeling safe in the knowledge that legally there's nothing anyone can do to stop me. With that in mind, why don't we get started with the movie I chose to talk about today, which is 1953's The Bigamist. Truth told, I know nothing about it, but the title made me giggle, so I figured it would be a good place to start. So I'm gonna go watch this bad boy, and then I'll meet you back here so we can get this legally sound video started. All right, I'm really happy I didn't live through the 1950s. Let's do this thing. The Bigamist is a movie about a man who is a bigamist. I truly wish there was more I could say on that, but I feel like the title pretty much sums it up. It was directed by a woman named Ida Lupino, who sounds like a bit of a badass to the point that I almost don't want to spend time making jokes about a film she created, although that said, she is dead now, so I feel like she probably doesn't really care if I do it. But yeah, from what I've read, she was a bit of a trailblazer. Not only was she a female director in the 1950s, which was very rare, but she was also a female actress, which was less rare on its own. But when combined with the whole director thing, it put Lupino in a class almost entirely her own. With The Bigamist, she's often credited as the first woman to direct herself in a major motion picture. And while I've read a lot of sources that say that's not actually true, she was at the very least one of the first, and let's be honest, even if she was fifth or sixth, that's still way more impressive than anything I've ever done. And while being a multi-hyphenate in a world where she wasn't legally allowed to open a bank account in her own name would have been enough on its own for me to safely conclude that she was a very cool lady, it wasn't until I read a little bit about the production of The Bigamist that I fully began to grasp the true extent of Lupino's badassery, because the story behind this movie is absolutely insane. Not as insane as the fact that women weren't allowed to have bank accounts until the 1960s, but still, insane nonetheless. The Bigamist was written by a man named Collier Young, who also happened to be Lupino's ex-husband. At the time of the film's production, the two had been recently divorced when Young left Lupino to be with a woman named Joan Fontaine, and while choosing to make a movie about an extramarital affair with your husband, who from the sound of it was having his fair share of extramarital affairs, might sound like the most uncomfortable situation anyone has ever gotten themselves into, just know that Lupino found a way to make things infinitely more awkward by literally casting Joan Fontaine as the second female lead of the movie. And casting the other woman in her marriage to play the other woman in her movie wasn't the only way that Lupino incorporated her personal life into her art. Midway through the movie, her character becomes pregnant out of wedlock, which is something that Ida Lupino herself had also recently gone through, because as it turns out, her ex-husband wasn't the only person who was sneaking around in their marriage, because, well, 1950s Hollywood was basically just one long orgy in the shape of a major metropolitan city. I couldn't 100% confirm this, but I do get the sense that Lupino and Fontaine were big enough stars at the time that people watching this would have been aware of the behind-the-scenes drama. I feel like this movie might be the 1953 equivalent of if Lindsay Lohan directed a movie about a love triangle in 2006 and cast Hilary Duff and Aaron Carter to co-star in it with her, which, not gonna lie, that does sound awesome. I'm very upset that that movie doesn't actually exist. Still, while knowing about all the sordid details that went into the production does make this movie feel a lot cooler, the fact that I wouldn't have known about them had I not done research does highlight my biggest issue with The Bigamist, which is that it is, without question, the most 1953 movie to have ever existed. And given that I'm not a person from the 1950s, I can't help but feel like there's a lot here that just goes right over my head. The passage of time has made it so that I am very far removed from this film's intended audience, and because of this, I feel like I'm missing a baseline level of knowledge necessary for understanding everything that's going on in a way that makes things end up feeling, well, confusing more than anything. I can't really put my finger on a lot of this movie, and to show you what I mean by that, why don't I give you guys a more in-depth breakdown of the plot? Although, like I said, there's really not that much to it. It really is just about a bigamist. I'm not gonna lie, this movie threw me through a loop pretty much the moment it began. After some opening credits and a couple of dramatic establishing shots, the first thing that we see is this.
Can I come in now?
No.
And I simply cannot stress to all of you watching how little that interaction has anything to do with the rest of the movie. I'm sure that screenwriting practices have evolved a lot since this movie was made, but I gotta imagine that even back then, anyone writing scripts professionally would have known that the first piece of dialogue in a film is incredibly important and goes a long way towards establishing the tone. So to have it spoken by an unnamed cleaning lady who is completely removed from the plot in every way feels like an odd choice. I will be perfectly honest, I have seen this movie 2 times now, and I'm still not entirely sure what the tone is supposed to be. You could tell me that this was meant to be a melodrama, a horror film, a psychological thriller, or a straight-up romance, and I'd be like, wow, this is a terrible example of that genre, but I guess that does make sense. But even with the wide net this movie seems to be casting, that opening interaction still doesn't really make sense to me, because were I to look at it in a vacuum and guess what it was going for, I think I would probably guess comedy. And comedy is one thing that this movie is definitely not. And I know this from the fact that the score makes it sound like a wolfman could break through one of those doors at any minute. Granted, I'm not an expert in music, but you'd think that were they going for comedy, they would know to include at least one kazoo. And granted, there's a chance that the only reason this goofy little interaction is reading as comedic to me is because I'm from nowadays, and, well, old-timey people sound silly to me. Like, I'm not entirely sure what accent the people in this movie are going for, but I do believe in my heart that it's probably for the best that everyone who talks like that is dead now. Hopefully that wasn't too harsh. That said though, even in a world where the way they talk survived instead of just morphing into Kelsey Grammer, I still think this would be a very strange way to start this movie. Like, strip away whatever is making things read as comedic to me, and you're left with, well, literally nothing. Which is an odd choice for the start of your film. Gun to my head, if I had to guess the purpose of that interaction, it would be to establish the old man behind the door as a no-nonsense fuddy-duddy who takes his job very seriously, because that is kind of important to the story, but, well, even that explanation feels kind of unsatisfying, because one, if that is what they're going for here, I would not have gotten it had I not spent a very long time doing my damnedest to try and understand it, and 2, they establish that fact about the character in literally every scene that he's in, including the one that immediately follows this one. So even if that was their intention, this part still feels like a weird choice. For those curious, the job that he's overly serious about is screening prospective parents for adoption. So after that weird little convo, we head on over to what should have been the opening scene of the movie, in which a seemingly nice married couple are looking to start a family.
Well, I believe that's everything.
I hope so.
Yes, it's a lengthy business. You must be tired.
I'm so excited. I wish we could take the youngster right home with us. When do you think we can expect to get him?
And right off the bat, one of the things that struck me about this movie is just how cavalierly the people here seem to be taking the idea of adopting a child. Like, based on the way that lady is talking about it, she seems to view bringing home a baby in the same way that I viewed getting a tattoo on my butt that one time. Like, yeah, I know it's a commitment I'll have to deal with for the rest of my life, but whatever, it'll be fun, why not? I probably shouldn't have told you guys about the tattoo on my butt. I think one of the weirdest ways this casual approach to parenting manifests is with the way that the adoption agent is portrayed. Because like I said, not a scene goes by where someone doesn't remark on how seriously he takes his job, and the movie seems to think that this is an odd quirk that the dude has, despite the fact that, well, I honestly can't think of a job that should be taken more seriously. Just about every other character in this movie seems to think that the old dude shouldn't be so uptight because, like, I don't know, the baby will probably be fine. And the movie treats his desire to ensure the welfare of the children he works with as so totally out of the norm that it actually goes out of its way to justify it with his backstory.
If all the others was like you, there wouldn't be any babies given away in this state at all. Why are you such an old fuss budget, huh?
If you had made a mistake once, you wouldn't want to ever let it happen again. Not where a child is involved.
And like, obviously justification is a huge part of good screenwriting, but that said, I do think that some things can probably go without saying, and maybe I'm weird here, but I feel like the reason that someone wouldn't want a child to end up in an abusive household is probably one of those things. I feel like I'm going to want to say the phrase, "I'm so happy I didn't live through the 50s" a lot over the course of this video, and so rather than repeating myself, I think I'm just going to start a running list of reasons why that's the case, and at the very top of my list has got to be their laissez-faire approach to childcare. Like, I have no clue how my parents managed to make it out of that decade alive and have me, but I'm very happy that they did. For the most part. Also, for what it's worth, despite all the grief people give the adoption agent for taking his job too seriously, he doesn't even really seem to be taking his job all that seriously.
Oh, well, just a minute. I'm afraid I forgot something. I have to sign these. These give us permission to check into every detail of your private life.
Granted, I am not an adoption agent, so I can't say this for sure, but I do feel pretty confident that the background check shouldn't be something that almost slips your mind. Like, if I had to guess, I would imagine that that would be what most of the adoption process is. Or if it's not, then it definitely should be. The main guy seems taken aback by it though, because, well, I'm pretty sure he just found out he was adopting this baby like 20 minutes ago, and as you guys could see in that clip, something about the idea of having his life thoroughly investigated clearly fills him with dread. And in a normal movie, I'd be very curious to find out what that thing he's worried about is, but like, this movie is called The Bigamist, and since I do know what a bigamist is, I feel like I already have a pretty good guess. And that's honestly kind of a shame because a big chunk of the next part of the movie just kind of follows the adoption agent around as he digs into the main dude's life. And I do actually think that had I not already known what was going on, things actually probably would have been pretty interesting. I mentioned before that I had trouble figuring out the genre of this movie, but I kind of think there's a good chance that it was made as a mystery, but they just happened to pick the one title that they shouldn't have because it gives everything away. Like, I kind of feel like there's a chance that The Bigamist is the equivalent of if Agatha Christie had named her book Everyone Commits the Murder Together. Spoilers? Actually, I guess that's not really a spoiler because I didn't say what book that is, so. It's Murder on the Orient Express. The title is honestly so egregious that I actually started to wonder if maybe audiences at this time just might not have known what a bigamist was. Like maybe it was kind of like the 1953 version of when people will name a movie like Pareidolia or something, where the word is obscure enough that not everyone necessarily knows what it means going in, so the movie kind of explains it as they go, and then people end up leaving the theater with a slightly bigger vocabulary. It's either that, or maybe the idea of a bigamist was just so shocking and disgusting at that point that it wasn't spoken about in polite society enough to enter people's lexicons. Like, I feel like there's a chance that the title is the 1953 equivalent of calling your film Hot Carl. Never thought I'd say the term Hot Carl in a video, but here we are. Don't look it up. Whatever the case may be, the title is terrible, and if it were up to me, it would have been called Detective Grandpa, because we spend the next portion of the movie watching while that old dude tries to figure out what the main dude might be hiding. He starts by investigating the couple's home.
You know, this really is a beautifully planned apartment.
Yes, we think so.
Oh, immaculate.
You sure you won't have something? A Coke?
Could I have a glass of milk instead?
Yes, surely, sir.
Thank you.
What? Ew. Okay, reason number 2, I'm glad I didn't live through the 50s, is that people back then were apparently just walking around drinking milk in the afternoon like a bunch of creeps. I'm not gonna lie, I'm not entirely sure how much I trust this dude with the well-being of children anymore. As he sips on that nice refreshing glass of dairy, the adoption agent says that because the main dude spends a lot of time in Los Angeles for his work as a traveling salesman, he's going to need some references from there as well. Naturally, the main dude reacts to this as though it is absolutely psychotic that the man doing his background check would actually check into his background.
I understand you spend a great deal of time in Los Angeles on business.
Yes, that's right.
Then perhaps you could give me the names of some of the people down there with whom you work. Oh, it's all routine, nothing more than that.
You're very conscientious, aren't you, Mr. Jordan? Well, I'll drop you a line and refer you to lots of people in Los Angeles. There's something else about me I think you should know. I have a small mole on my right shoulder. Would you like to see it?
I really love that moment because I'm pretty sure that was meant to be a joke about how nosy the old dude is, but because men from the 1950s all talked like robots trying to pass themselves off as Frasier, it didn't really read right away. There was a moment there when the genuine lack of inflection in his voice made me think that he was being 100% sincere in disclosing that information, and we were about to get a full-body strip search right there in the kitchen. And I'm not gonna lie, when I realized that that wasn't the case, I was a little bit disappointed because I am curious to see what this man looks like naked. Like, I feel like boobs always looked a little bit different in older movies, so I am curious to know if that's true for penises as well. Also, it is absolutely insane to me that this man is having an attitude with the person deciding whether or not he gets a child. Granted, I have never personally attempted to adopt yet, but I imagine that if and when I do, I will speak to the person interviewing me only when spoken to and make sure that all of their earthly demands are met. I'm not even joking. I feel like an adoption agent probably could strip search me if they wanted. They could look me dead in the eye and say, okay, right now I'm going to need to take a look up your butthole with a flashlight, and I feel like I would probably drop trow in the middle of the street if that's what it took to get a child. And not for nothing, but I don't even think that the sass here is warranted, because again, despite the movie's constant assertions that the agent is overly thorough, I feel very confident in saying that he is not.
Oh, Mr. Jordan, I'm sorry I'm late.
That's all right. I was early.
What are you two doing in the kitchen?
Mr. Jordan's been looking us over.
I've seen your home. It's pleasant. Very pleasant indeed.
Won't you stay for dinner?
Oh, thanks. I can't. I have to get back to the office. Lots more paperwork to do there.
I'll see you to the door.
Oh, thank you. Goodbye, Mr. Ray.
He literally leaves when the wife gets home. Dude doesn't even have time to finish his milk, for God's sakes. And like, I don't know, maybe women were just so subhuman at the time that it never crossed his mind, but I do feel like a thorough home evaluation would require the mother of the child be there in some capacity. Lord knows she's going to be spending more time with the kid than its traveling salesman bigamist father, so... After the home visit, the adoption agent gets some references on the main dude and makes his way over to Los Angeles to investigate the offices he works out of when he's traveling.
The Grahams wish to adopt a child, and we must have certain information.
Well, isn't that nice? They want to adopt a baby.
I don't know how to explain it exactly, but that woman right there is the most 1950s person that I have ever seen in my life. If you were to ask me to describe a woman from the 1950s, it would be that exact person right there, excitedly asking someone if they're gonna have a baby in that exact tone of voice that she just used. I feel like it goes without saying, but she is definitely one of my favorite characters in the entire movie. Unfortunately, she's not the only person working in the office.
How long has Mr. Graham made his office here?
Oh, I guess about 2 years.
Where does he live when he's in Los Angeles?
I guess he just lives around, hotels, motels, wherever he can get in.
It's cocktail time, honey. Are you with me?
Okay, number 3 on my list of reasons why I'm happy not to be living through the 1950s is that right there, because... Well, actually, I feel like I don't really even need to explain to you guys why a boss forcing drinks on his secretary in the middle of the day is creepy, so... I mean, granted, it's still not as creepy as having a glass of milk in the middle of the day, but still, we've come a long way.
Mr. Jordan, this is Roy Esterly.
Oh, I'm very pleased to meet you. What line are you in?
Mr. Jordan is getting some information on Harry Graham. Oh, Harry's not in any trouble. Mr. Jordan's not a cop. I'll tell you later.
All right, 1950s lady said ACAB. Welcome to the Resistance, Betty Lou.
Okay, sweetie. You fill him in on Mr. Exclusive, and when you get through, come on back and have a little chat with me, huh?
Jesus Christ, what is wrong with this man? He's only in the movie for about a minute, but I'm pretty sure that every line of dialogue he has is now considered illegal. Like, I'm not even joking. I genuinely think that you could clip this scene out and use it as an HR training video to show people what not to do in an office. Still, despite the fact that he is the sleaziest man in the world, the adoption agent asked the creepy dude some questions about the main guy because, well, it's either that or trust the opinion of a woman, so.
Excuse me, but could I ask you a few questions?
Why, sure. Fire away.
What do you know of Mr. Graham?
Oh, he's a good guy.
But you called him Mr. Exclusive.
Oh, well, I was kind of kidding, I guess. See, we never see him except here in the office, and of course when he's here, he's buried in work. You know, I can't understand how a guy can live without a little social life.
So he's not a playboy, like some cornballs I could mention.
And honestly, I feel like that little interaction right there exemplifies what I find so fascinating about the 1950s, because if that dude were to say, I'm having sex, that would be completely scandalous. But he has no problem saying, boys need to have a little social life in the middle of an office to an adoption agent. And even though I feel like everyone in that room probably gets the implication that having a social life more than likely means taking his secretary to a dirty motel room where he while his buddy from behind a two-way mirror, that's just like totally acceptable. It's a weird system, is my point. But yeah, based on what the perv says, the main dude seems like a bit of a square who, for some reason, doesn't want to bang his employees. And I think this is meant to make the audience see him as a good dude, so when his dark secret finally comes out, it's that much more shocking. And like, again, were this movie not called The Bigamist, it totally would have worked. As it stands now, though, I feel like the only way they could have surprised me would have been to make him, like, not a bigamist. They don't do that, though. He is very much a bigamist. And I know that I'm harping on this point a lot, but that's only because I genuinely think that the only thing keeping this movie from being great is the title. In the opening act, Lupino builds a genuine sense of mystery and intrigue, so to have that all be completely unraveled feels like a waste to me. Like, just look at the moment that this has all been building to. After some digging, the adoption agent finds the main dude's house in Los Angeles and shows up unannounced, and the main dude does not seem happy to see him. Bet you can't guess why.
Good evening.
Hello. Aren't you a little off your beat?
Well, I was coming to Los Angeles anyway for a meeting tomorrow. I'm reading a paper at the welfare convention.
Oh, how nice.
So while I was here, I've been doing a little checking up on you. Tell me, why are you listed in the telephone book under Harrison Graham?
Harrison Graham's my real name.
Oh, you changed it?
Some time ago. I thought it sounded a little formal, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, but in San Francisco, you're listed as Harry.
The phone company got it mixed up. Look, I'm dead on my feet. I just got home from work a couple of hours ago. Suppose we meet for lunch tomorrow. Maybe we can learn to get along.
Well, I'm busy tomorrow, but I'm sorry I bothered you. But after all, it is my job.
I understand.
Yeah. Good night.
Good night.
That would have been such a gag! It is a genuinely well-crafted and shocking reveal, but because the title already spilled the beans, you kind of just end up thinking, like, finally. I've been waiting for the bigamy to start for ages. Unfortunately, though, the bigamy isn't as interesting as you'd hope. I think I was kind of expecting there to be some tawdry, over-the-top 1950s shit going on here, but honestly, it just kind of seems nice. Main dude just kind of seems like a nice, caring husband and father, and even with the bigamy, I'd still say that he is the least gross man we've encountered in this movie thus far. I mean, I guess the old dude might have gotten that title, but I simply can't get past that huge glass of milk he drank earlier, so. Unfortunately for main guy, old dude does not feel the same way about the situation that I do.
How long has this double life of yours been going on?
About 8 months.
And you tried to adopt a child.
What are you going to do?
Call the police.
You can't. Not now. Not with her like this. Please, I've got to try to make you understand. Please.
He's calling the cops? Jesus Christ, the 1950s were insane. Granted, I don't really know how I'd react if I found out that someone I knew was leading a secret bigamist lifestyle, but I feel fairly confident in saying that picking up the phone and calling the cops wouldn't even cross my mind. I mean, maybe I'd call the wife, but even that seems like a pretty harsh thing to do to someone in the middle of the night. Just like, hello, yes, this is your adoption agent. Your husband has another wife. Good night. Off the top of my head, if I had to do something in this situation, I feel like I would talk to at least 5 of my closest friends about what to do first, and then I would take up religion again and ask for my priest's advice just to be safe and make sure that I've thought everything through. After that, I think I'd find out what kind of muffins the woman likes and bake her a batch of those to bring to her house where I'd ease her into the situation as gently as I could. Provided, of course, that she likes muffins. She could very well be a scone person, and that would be something that I'd need to figure out were I to take it upon myself to destroy her life in this way. And of course, this is only if I did anything about the situation, and that is a very big if. I like to think of myself as a good person, but the truth is I'm a passive person first and foremost, so I feel like realistically what would happen is that I would just back away towards the door and say like, you do you, dude. If your wife asks, I was never here. Old dude doesn't do that, though, and he is absolutely dumbstruck at the idea that someone could possibly fall in love with 2 people at the same time.
I can't believe it. I can't. How could a man like you, successful, admired, get into a position as as vile as this.
And because of the old man's confusion, the rest of the movie is basically just him explaining how it happened, and the Cliff Notes version of the story is basically that he was lonely.
Have you ever spent half your life living in hotel rooms, eating in restaurants with only a newspaper for company, walking the streets, looking for a movie you haven't seen? Well, that's the way it was one Sunday afternoon when I was stuck in Los Angeles. Couldn't get home to spend the weekend with Eve. I called her, but we didn't talk about us. She was in one of her executive moves, career woman. You've never seen her that way. She's different now. Anyway, when I got off the phone, I was twice as lonely. I felt as if the walls of the hotel room were closing in on me. So I decided to go out for a walk. Some men on the road escape their loneliness with women who are easy to get. But that didn't work with me. In all the years of my marriage, I never looked at another woman. Eve was my whole life. Yet, sometimes in those years, I felt a distance between us which was more than miles.
Like I said, he was a traveling salesman, so he was away from his home a lot, and after living out of a hotel for too long, he started to yearn for a little interaction, which he sought out in literally the worst way I could possibly imagine, by going on a bus tour of celebrity homes.
I liked movies, though I really didn't care where Clark Gable lived. But here were people going someplace, and I went along with them.
I am not a tour bus person. I have never been a tour bus person. And if I were the main dude, I would have chosen 1,000 years of isolation before I willingly sat on a cramped bus and just listened to some dude rattle off a bunch of stupid locations we just drove by. And it is because I am not fond of bus tours that this is without question my least favorite part of the movie, because, well, it's pretty much just an actual bus tour.
Here we are. On your right is the home of that shy and modest man, Harvey's friend and yours, Jimmy Stewart. Now take a look on your left, and you'll see the home of that funny, funny man, Jack the Miser Benny.
The fact that they felt the need to say the celebrities' names like that felt weird enough that it made me think that maybe this was one of those times when stuff was going over my head because I was born 46 years after this movie debuted. So I looked up the names that the guy said, and honestly, that just kind of made things weirder.
Behind that big hedge over there lives a little man who is Santa Claus to the whole world, Edmund Gwenn. Remember Miracle on 34th Street?
If that name the bus driver just said sounds familiar, it's probably because you saw it in the opening credits of this movie, because that's literally the actor who plays the adoption agent. So not only does this scene stick out like a very boring sore thumb, but it also breaks the reality of the movie we're watching. And while that bus tour is tearing at the fabric of reality in the background, the main dude meets the woman who will soon become his second wife in what is perhaps the most 1950s way imaginable, by lighting her cigarette for her on a crowded bus.
Thanks.
That's number 4. From there, they move on to some of the absolute worst flirting that I have ever seen.
Oh, that was a wonderful picture. Did you see it? You missed something. I'd like to know where my favorite mule, Francis, lives.
What's that?
Oh, excuse me.
That's all right.
Haven't you any interest in how the other half lives?
No, not particularly. I'm just crazy about bus rides. Gives me a chance to get off my feet.
Okay, the woman is tired and clearly not interested in conversation. What do? If you said creepily jump across the aisle to sit next to her, then congratulations, you win!
No. I wanted to say all those things to you just now, only on no level. Thanks, Coach. Do you mind if I sit here?
Well, there's not much I can do about it. You're here.
I have seen this movie twice now, and I know for a fact that the two of them end up getting together and falling in love, but even so, after watching that scene again, I would still bet every dollar I have that that man is about to murder that woman. And I would put this on my list of things that make me happy that I'm not living through the 1950s, but as I understand it, this isn't all that different from what women still have to deal with to this day, so hooray! Nothing's changed. I will give this to our generation, though, and that's that if this scene were in a movie today, it would at the very least be considered creepy, but that was not the case in the 1950s, because based on the way that the rest of the movie plays out, whatever the fuck that was apparently considered to be the start of a beautiful romance. The two get off the bus and immediately start making dinner plans.
Well, thanks for the use of the lighter. Bye.
Oh, just a minute. In case you ever need a deep freeze, my name's Harry Graham from San Francisco.
Oh, well, that's nice. Mine's Phyllis Martin from here.
From here? This doesn't look like very good farmland. You told me you were a farmer's daughter.
Yes, well, that was a long time ago.
Okay.
Thanks. Oops, doesn't work. Well, remember me to Jack Benny.
And there's something else you should know about traveling salesmen.
You'd kill me.
They have very large expense accounts and frequently buy dinner for pretty girls they meet on buses.
Well, I must say your style's improving fast. But I'm afraid I can't. Sorry.
I'm sorry, too.
Yeah, well... Do you like Chinese cooking?
Sure. Why? Have you changed your mind?
I know a place that has the greatest water chestnuts in town. If you can stand water chestnuts.
I'm mad about them. Let's go.
All right.
Okay, who the fuck is mad about water chestnuts? It's like saying your favorite food is ice. And of course, upon hearing that this movie from the 1950s was headed to a Chinese restaurant, my butthole immediately clenched up tight because I was positive I was about to see something horribly offensive. But to the film's credit, they managed to mostly avoid racism here. The one Asian character is actually played by an Asian actor, and he doesn't really speak enough to do anything stereotypical or offensive. So while this is admittedly an extremely low bar, because it was the 1950s, I was actually pleasantly surprised here. Still, just because the movie itself doesn't seem to be particularly racist, that doesn't mean that the characters in the movie aren't, because the main dude seems absolutely scandalized by the restaurant that his new lady friend has taken him to.
Early American Chinese. You're gonna love it. Cozy little place, isn't it?
Do we have to eat here?
Oh, yes, it's a must. Now, why don't you relax and I'll be back in a few minutes, huh? Hi, Sam.
Good evening, Miss Martin. Good evening, sir.
Will you take care of the gentleman for me?
Right this way, sir.
I'll have a drink at the bar while I'm waiting for the lady.
Good.
Why does he keep looking around like he's about to get mugged? Not only is this just a Chinese restaurant, but it might actually be the nicest Chinese restaurant that I've ever seen in my life. Literally every Chinese restaurant that I know of looks like it was converted from an abandoned DMV, and I will eat there any day of the week. I would give my left arm to eat at a place like this, but this dude is acting like he just walked into the seediest dive bar in all of Los Angeles for some reason. And right now, some of you might be disappointed because you tuned into this discussion of an old-timey movie specifically hoping for some extremely problematic shit to occur. And to you, I say, don't worry. Just because this movie isn't particularly hateful towards Asian people, that doesn't mean that it's completely devoid of all forms of bigotry altogether. That right there is number 5 on my list of reasons why I'm happy I didn't live through the 1950s, although what that exact reason is, I haven't really decided yet. It's either homophobia or the fact that gay men back then all apparently had to rock weird little mustaches. Frankly, I don't know if I would be able to pull that look off. The couple has their dinner and says goodbye, and to the main dude's credit, nothing physical happens.
Thanks for a lovely evening.
There's nothing. Drop in again sometime. So long.
You know, we've been together 7 hours, and I still don't know a thing about you, except that you're the nicest stranger I ever met on a bus.
Well, I don't know anything about you either. Let's leave it that way, huh?
All right.
I will tell you one thing about myself, though.
What's that?
On that bus this afternoon, I felt just as lonely as you did. I feel better now.
Clearly, they have a bit of a romantic spark together, but nothing they do here would be particularly scandalous to anyone who isn't Mike Pence. So while I don't particularly support sneaking around behind your partner's back, I do kind of support whatever this weird little date was, because I do think that both of the people involved genuinely needed it. Like, I'm not gonna lie, I'm pretty sure that the main dude is just flat out depressed.
I never expected to see Phyllis again, but I knew I'd remember this day when two strangers helped each other through a lonely Sunday. I felt good again, not very sleepy.
I feel like if that scene had gone on any longer, it would have just turned into him reading a list of symptoms from WebMD. Like, I felt good again, not very sleepy. My appetite came back, I stopped crying at random moments throughout the day. My erectile dysfunction went away. And the more I think about it like that, the more I get a little bit bummed out by this movie, because not only does the main dude not recognize his symptoms as depression, but the movie definitely doesn't either. I don't think depression would have been something that people recognized back then, which sucks, because just because people didn't recognize it, that doesn't mean that it wasn't there. And I think this is why I'm a lot more forgiving of a lot of the people in this movie than I might have been had it been made today, because I do feel like they were all playing by a very different set of rules that are much harder to navigate than the ones that we have nowadays. Normally, I would say that the solution to this entire movie would be honesty. The dude just needs to properly communicate his needs and work through them together with his wife. But if this phone call he has after his date is any indication, then he tried the hell out of honesty. But, well, it didn't really seem to take.
We're ready with your call to San Francisco.
Yes, thank you, operator. Eve?
My, 2 calls in one day. Well, never mind, darling. This is deductible business.
Monkey business. I cheated on you today. I thought you should be the first to know.
I feel like he probably could have eased her into that a little bit more. Dude didn't even say hello. Surprisingly, though, the wife does not seem fazed.
Haven't you heard the wife is always the last to know?
I'm serious. A beautiful brunette, all curves and soft shoulders.
Oh, how wonderful. I hope you'll be very happy together.
What kind of talk is that? Aren't you even jealous?
You won't spoil my sleep one bit.
And the first time I watched this, I thought the movie was implying that the wife just thought he was joking around. But the more I watch it, the more I feel like she absolutely believes what he's saying. She just doesn't want to deal with it.
She wasn't really beautiful, just nice. Kind of a funny little mouse. Don't you want to know how I made out?
Oh, I forgot. I heard that Duff's may open 3 more retail outlets in Los Angeles County. Got a pencil handy? Better write down his name and address.
I mean, come on now. Did you see that face? I was raised Catholic for far too long not to recognize avoidance and repression when I see it. And it's weird because even though he's currently telling his wife that he had an affair, I actually feel really bad for the guy in this scene. His problem all along was that he just needed someone to talk to, but his wife really isn't there to listen. No matter how hard he tries to get through to her.
I wish you were here with me right now. I didn't even touch her.
Touch who?
You know, the funny little mouse.
What a shame. Better luck next time.
The extent to which she is not listening in this scene, I feel like he could probably bang someone in front of her and she'd just be like, "Oh, clumsy you, did you slip while you were naked again? Well, go on, apologize to the nice lady for repeatedly falling on her." That was my 1950s housewife accent. I hope you liked it. But yeah, basically this dude is caught between two women that he loves, and the rest of the movie is just him going back and forth between the two of them, trying to figure out what to do, only to have things end up more and more complicated. It's kind of like a very dramatic episode of Three's Company. He tries to call it off with the second lady, but when he goes back to Los Angeles for business, he finds out that she's pregnant. And so he then tries to do the right thing and call it off with his wife, but before he can do that, her dad dies and he doesn't want to be mean. He claims that he had intentions of calling it off with his wife eventually, but she was so intent on adopting a child that he wanted to stick around and do that for her, which, maybe not the best plan, but I do kind of get where he was coming from. She was, after all, an old crone at the age of 32, and she repeatedly said that having a child was very important to her, so this was probably her only shot at it, meaning that while the main dude definitely wasn't a saint, I do think that a lot of this movie is just him trying his best to be decent in the face of some terrible circumstances that he created for himself. And yeah, I won't show you any of it because it's mostly boring, but this movie does a pretty decent job of showing nuance in the situation and justifying why the main dude does what he does. And, well, the adoption agent seems to agree because after the main dude finishes telling his story, Miracle on 34th Street picks up the phone to make a call, only twist! This time it's not to the police.
Now you're going to call the police. Well, maybe I ought to thank you.
I'd like a taxi at 132 Brinkman Street, please. That's right, thank you. I'm not a policeman. It's not my duty to do anything but see that the juvenile wards of the state of California are given decent homes. I'll pick up my taxi outside. I can't figure out my feelings toward you. I despise you, and I pity you. I don't even want to shake your hand, and yet I almost wish you luck.
Of course, this movie was made in the 1950s, and I'm pretty sure it was against the law to show nuance back then, so after the adoption agent leaves, the main dude is overcome with guilt over what he's done, so he confesses, and then he's taken to court where he's sentenced to jail for bigamy. End of film. No, I don't think that it does. I actually think this movie was genuinely quite good. Don't get me wrong, I would never sit down on a Friday night and relax with 1953's The Bigamist, but as far as old-timey movies go, I definitely think that it's worth checking out. Hell, I actually think that if it had a different title, I would have been genuinely riveted by it at times. Granted, if it had a different title, I don't think I would have ever seen it, because like I said, I only chose it off the list because the name The Bigamist made me laugh, but still, it's not without its charms. If you played it for me in a film class and told me it was this hugely influential movie, I would absolutely believe you, because while I'm definitely not an expert on classical films, this one does feel pretty ahead of its time. Granted, it is also very much of its time. It's the most 1950s thing that I have ever seen, but the way that it handles its subject matter feels more complex and nuanced than a lot of the stuff that gets made today. I definitely think that you can feel the feminine point of view that's at play here, and given how rare that was for the time, I think that alone makes this worth watching. We really don't get to hear enough from women of this era, and that's a shame because, as Lupino proves, that doesn't mean that they didn't have stuff to say. And again, these sorts of movies aren't really my cup of tea, but if they're yours, then I full-heartedly recommend this one. It's not without its flaws, and were I to edit it down, I would absolutely cut the bus tour, but it's good, and the fact that it's been relegated to a name on a list of forgotten movies seems really unfair to me. Okay, I feel like this is probably gonna make me sound really dumb, but I think if I learned one thing from this movie, it's that people from the 1950s were people. Okay, that definitely sounded dumb. Let me explain. I think one of the weirdest parts of watching this movie was the fact that it was set in LA, because I used to live there, so I actually recognized a lot of the places where they filmed. I think. I'll be honest, I was never hugely invested in Los Angeles, so I can't say for sure that the places in the movie are the places I think that they are, but at the very least they look similar. And seeing the place I used to live captured on film like this made it sink in that, like, oh yeah, this is all real. I mean, it's not real because it's a movie, but like physically, these things all existed. I'm pretty sure that this right here is MacArthur Park, which was right by where I used to live, so I drove by it all the time. Granted, I never went in there because Los Angeles has a homelessness epidemic and it's sad as hell right now, but it's still there, and were you to add a bunch of tents and some heroin needles to this scene, it would look the exact same as it does today. This may sound weird, but I've always had a little bit of cognitive dissonance when I watch old movies, where I think I kind of believe on some level that I'm peering into this black and white alternate universe. But here, I've seen what this world looks like in color. I've seen it in person, so I can comprehend that that bench was actually by that spiky looking bush, which was actually in front of that tiny boat, which was actually on that very smelly little lake. Watching this movie, it really sunk in that no, this isn't some other world I'm looking at. It's our world. It might sound crackly and look monochromatic, but that's only because they were using the tools that they could to make sense of the world around them, and those tools were different from the ones we have today. And letting that sink in, it made it that much easier to grasp the idea that seated on that bench by that spiky bush in front of that tiny boat on that smelly little lake was a flesh and blood man. The words he was saying may not have been his own, but he was actually there, and even though we're separated by about a century, he probably wasn't all that different from the rest of us. I'm sure he had hopes and fears and flaws and beliefs, and though those hopes and fears and flaws and beliefs might very well seem different than yours or mine, I think that might just be because he was just using the tools that he could to make sense of the world around him, and those tools were different from the ones we have today. When I think about people in the past, I tend to think about them as a monolith of sorts. If you were to ask me to describe someone from the 1950s, I'd say like racist homophobe who drops their monocle into their drink whenever they see the sight of a woman's ankles. And while that might have been the culture, that doesn't mean that it was every single person who existed within it. Watching this movie, I couldn't help but wonder a question that I've wondered a lot over the years. And that question is, did ancient Rome have a gay rights movement? Bet you guys didn't expect me to say that, did you? And like, before you guys say anything, I know that there's a complicated answer there and that Roman conceptions of homosexuality were very different from our own. So while I still welcome any comments you might have on the matter because of the algorithm, just know that I don't really care all that much about any specifics you might be giving me because, well, this is really meant to be more of a thought experiment than anything. Because right at this very moment, I can go to Wikipedia and get a 2-page rundown of ancient Roman views on homosexuality. As a matter of fact, I did just that last night in order to properly write this script, and it was sexy as hell. But that's also really weird when you think about it. The Roman Empire lasted over 1,000 years, and it spanned a huge portion of the globe, so the idea that their attitudes towards gay shit could be summed up at all much less over the span of a fairly brief article on the internet, is pretty insane. All you have to do is think about how much views on sexuality have changed over the span of just a couple of decades, and it becomes very hard to believe that over the course of a millennia, there wasn't at least a couple of shifts here and there. And even if their views did stay consistent century after century, they still had to come from somewhere. Who's to say that in the early days of Romulus and Remus, there wasn't some dude out there with a stone tablet over his head chanting, "We're here, we're queer, and it's not gay if you're the top and you do it with a slave." And maybe I'm wrong, because I'll be honest, I didn't really read that Wikipedia page so much as look at the dirty pictures of frescoes on it, but I feel like if that guy did exist, we'll probably never know about him. Fights he fought or struggles he endured have been assimilated into this broad strokes view of history we all have and completely lost to time. I think that if this movie has a thesis statement, it's this speech that the judge gives at the very end, right before he sentences the main dude to jail.
These are decent women, Mr. Graham. You're basically a decent man, and that's the whole point. When a man, even with the best intentions, breaks the moral laws we live by, we really don't need man-made laws to punish him. You'll find out that the penalty of the court is always the smallest punishment.
And really what I take that quote to mean is that we're all kind of beholden to the society that exists around us. Like, I definitely won't flat out defend the bigamist 100%, but the way the movie portrays him, he's really more of a victim of circumstances. His actions were dictated by his need for work and his mental state and his surroundings, and though he ends up doing a shitty thing, really all he's doing is trying his best to adapt to the world he's forced to live in. Watching this movie, you get all the nuance and complicated stuff that went into why the main dude did what he did, but if you step back far enough, then he's reduced to just being a bigamist. Then a little time passes and his story becomes nothing more than a hyperlink in a Wikipedia page full of films that nobody remembers, and the longer I think about it, the more that honestly kinda sucks. They say that those who don't study history are doomed to repeat it, but I genuinely think that ultimately history is nothing more than the people that made it, and eventually most of those people's stories will get lost to time. And if that really is the case, then how can we study what we don't actually really know? When I set out to make this series, it was because I was doing my best to avoid having to deal with the law like I was some sort of common bigamist. But now that I've almost made it through the first episode, I'm really excited to try and tackle more. I'm genuinely curious for us to go on this journey together and see what other stories from the past were almost doomed to obscurity, because I think if we do that, it'll give us a better picture of where we came from and where we are now. And when we actually take a good hard look at these stories we used to tell, then I think we'll learn that the past wasn't always as black and white as it seemed. And yeah, that's my video. Please like and subscribe and share and comment and buy my merch. For those of you interested, you can get your I Am Pro-Joyce t-shirt now. I feel like a lot of you are probably wondering what I Am Pro-Joyce means, and I have a video below that will explain that one, although I'm not sure how satisfying of an explanation it will be. Also, thank you again to Lauren for sponsoring this video. I'm very sorry that I didn't get my shit together to put the patch on the wall yet, but hopefully by the time this video is out, I will have fixed that. If I haven't fixed that by the time this video is out, then this part will be very confusing. If you'd like to be like Lauren, then please head on over to my Patreon. It's the best way to support the show and keep it going. Well, either that or buying a Pro-Joyce shirt also works. There are a lot of people who are very confused by this shirt. If you are, just watch the video. It is there. What am I doing? Oh, right. That's the end of the episode. Goodbye. Actually, no, I lied. It's not the end of the episode because now it's time for everyone's favorite part of this show. Willie poses for a thumbnail picture while his patrons' names scroll up the screen. And for this one, I think I'm gonna say like scandalous on the thumbnail. So I should make a face like something scandalous is happening. So like actually like nice stars. Oh boy. I really need to start thinking about like my actual face when I pose for these things, because I feel like I pose for them as like a video and then like I end up like highlighting every bit of chin that I have and like making the weirdest face. So I feel like I actually need to like pose for them like no, I always do that. I've never used this one, but I always do that. I should do the My Stars one again. I feel like that one was going to be a hit. My Stars! I sometimes forget that people see this. That's a winner. Scandalous. It's very late. I should go to bed. Thank you to these names, which I'm sure stopped scrolling a while ago. I don't have that many. Very grateful for the ones that I do have, but it doesn't take up that much time. I'm gonna go to bed now. Night, everybody.